Hey everybody, it's the Tatiana Show. After a few weeks hiatus, I'm happy to be back again. Last week we left off, or last time we left off with Lynn Ulbricht. We had done some episodes with Pamela Morgan, some other folks here at Liberty.me. But now we're back. We are broadcasting today live from North Bergen, New Jersey. It's Monday night, I think the 28th or the 29th of June. And tonight I'm joined by my good friend Alex Heid of Hack Miami. Alex, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Okay, so why don't you give people a little bit of a background, or maybe I'll give people a background, actually. This is how I met you. Where were we? We were down in the Miami conference, right?
Correct, the Bitcoin Miami conference.
Cool. So I showed up at the Ethereum house, and this is right on the weekend when Ethereum was about to launch. They showed that really snazzy video, and there were just a bunch of dudes hanging out in a house that you guys rented in Florida. And you were telling me about Hack Miami. And I still remember you were telling me that you had been featured in Rolling Stone. And to me, I thought that, I mean, hacking was just, you might as well just said a jumble of words. I don't know what hacking is at all. But during the time that we've gotten to know each other, you've given me a little bit of an education. So that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I don't think that people necessarily get to appreciate that. So why don't you give me a little bit of background, and we can go from there.
Cool. Yeah, well, essentially Hack Miami started off as essentially just a group of security enthusiasts who would meet up at a university and essentially study methods of offensive computing, ways to break into computers so that you can then defend them. Because you don't really know how to secure something unless you know how people are getting into them. And one of the first popular topics that we gave was hacking terrorist networks, which got the attention of some law enforcement agencies, but they were actually interested in how to hack terrorist networks, and it caused a bit of a row on the campus, and we moved it off-site. And
wait, where was this?
This
University
is
of Miami?
Florida International University.
Oh, okay, where's that? In Miami or no?
Yeah, in Miami. It's one of the other universities down there. And we started meeting up in pizza restaurants and any other place that would essentially have a projector, beer, and pizza. And we started meeting every 2 weeks, and it ended up becoming a regular thing where we ended up having a fairly large following and started attracting recruiters and information security folks from all different Fortune 500 companies. And the next thing you knew, we were in where we were throwing an annual conference, and then the conference got picked up in Rolling Stone. And we just did our third conference last year, which got featured on the cover of Society magazine in France.
So when did you start this? 3 years ago, or no, longer than that?
Hack Miami started meeting as a group of friends around 2008. There actually a lot of the same people from Federal Jack. They all just kind of realized they all had the same sort of interests, and so around 2008 is when it started to come together, and then and we officially incorporated around 2010.
All right, I'm going to ask you what may seem like a silly question, but to me, as somebody who doesn't consider themselves technical, I had a little brother, and my grandfather also, he had the Commodore 64, and then my little brother also liked computers. Why do people like computers when they're growing up? Like, what makes them interesting? Because to me, it doesn't seem interesting at all. But then the later application in some of the stuff that you do is a lot more intriguing. But what makes somebody interested in that in the first place? Like, do you have to like math, or what is it about that makes you interested in it?
That's actually a really good question, because that's definitely a common theme among a lot of hackers. There's a sort of a running joke that a lot of us know BASIC before we know English, and it's because we're exposed to these things from a young age. And I'm not exactly, I think.
What's these things? The language that you write code in, or
computers in general?
Okay.
Like from the time of being an infant or a very young child, just having access to a computer. I guess kids are able to absorb and learn a lot faster. So when children are essentially immersed in environments where that is their world, they're liable to take it up a lot faster. And I have never actually really thought of it down that angle, but it's pretty much kind of the same story with me and a bunch of my friends. We all essentially could we knew BASIC before we were able to speak proper English as kids, and it's just because maybe there's a video game aspect to it, the colors on the screen, just the simplicity of shiny things to a child. but I don't really know what the real reason would be, but that's definitely a common theme.
But what would you do with BASIC? Like, what
Well,
is that? I mean,
well
did somebody
as a
say if you type in these keys, you're going to get this result? How does that even come up? Because I know, okay, you play video games, that makes sense. You sit there, you go like this, it's fun. But
Well,
where do you start coding? What does that even mean?
when you're talking about like very small children, it's obviously usually a parent that will get them involved in it and say, type this. This if you do this, this will happen. And a lot of times it's to simply make video games. But as people are for older folks who even adolescents who get into it when they're teenage years, essentially they get into hacking as a way to make shortcuts for things. If you notice that you're doing the same thing over and over and over again on a computer, chances are you can automate it somehow. And that's where the concept of programming and scripting comes into play. So once you're programming and scripting and you realize that you can automate things, you realize you can also make it do more than just what it was intended to do, and start essentially pushing the boundaries of what you're allowed to do based on what the software defines as user permission. And then I guess it's there's kind of a rebel streak too, where you just kind of want to have unauthorized access and do things you're not supposed to do. And those all seem to be kind of staples within the hacking culture that have existed probably going back to since its inception in the 70s.
But where do you go on the computer in order to do the hacking? Like how do you even access the place where you would type in these commands?
Well, that would be the command line interface. So essentially, at the most basic level, there's two forms of using a computer. You've got CLI, which stands for Command Line Interface, and then you've got GUI, which is the Graphical User Interface. Now, most of the world is familiar with the GUI. That's the point-and-click Windows-based operating system, or any kind of visual that you see on software. Whereas all a GUI is really is just it's just a way to frame this code going on in the background that essentially isn't even being seen. It's just essentially a display for this code. And there's in the development world, you have programmers who specialize in both back-end coding and front-end coding. Some people are very, very good at writing the parts of the machine that make it work, and other people are very, very good at making the parts of the machine that make it display. And then you've got the hackers, which are very good at finding out where those people made mistakes and then getting in and taking all the code, taking all the customers, and accessing the server and doing things with it that they're not supposed to do.
All right, I think that was a pretty good explanation. Why do people... Okay, have you seen the Silk Road movie?
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to it during the weekend, but I've heard good things about it.
Well, the Deep Web movie by Alex Winters, it's obviously about the Silk Road. In it, they talk a lot about sort of a freedom culture that exists in the Deep Web. Can you tell people a little bit about what the Deep Web is and how that interacts with hackers, and is it only hackers in the Deep Web? Or just kind of explain that to people.
Yeah, essentially the concept of the deep web or the dark net, it's been...
Are they the same? Because I heard that the dark net and the deep web are different.
They're essentially, yeah, they're synonyms. Essentially, the dark net is the technical protocol for it, and deep web is just kind of a media word that's been thrown on top of it. And it's been... Those words are heavily misused by everybody on all sides of the debate. Essentially, a dark net or a dark network is essentially any communication between computers that's using a customized protocol. So if I want one computer to talk to another computer and I don't want anyone else to see it or know what's going on, I would write my own custom encrypted protocol and make it connect to it in a hidden way. These have existed since computers have existed. Darknets have always been around. The Tor network is a type of darknet that has been made accessible to the public and very easy to use. And in addition to Tor, there's the I2P network, and as time goes on, more will emerge. But essentially, the darknet is any computer system network that cannot be seen without knowing where to look. and the culture of the essentially the way it's abbreviated is HPVAC, hacking, freaking, viruses, anarchy, cracking, and sometimes they'll throw a W in there for wares, and that's I guess the Argoist kind of crypto anarchist culture that's been around in the hacking world since back in the BBS days, which stands for Bulletin Board Systems. So even before there was an internet, before there was such thing as a GUI, before when everything was just a terminal, hackers would have they would have their modems dial in to bulletin board systems, and they would just exchange messages with other hackers. And oftentimes that would be they would buy and sell things that you couldn't get elsewhere, or they would trade information that you couldn't get elsewhere. So in a way, what was going on Silk Road and what's going on in other parts of the deep web have always been going on. The difference is the media attention that was brought to it, the law enforcement attention that was brought to it, the scale at which it happened, and then the new protocol that was being used, as opposed to...
Pretty sophisticated, right? This was one of the most sophisticated systems of exchanging black market goods, period.
Well, if you're a federal prosecutor, that's a great thing to say.
I'm not a federal prosecutor.
No.
I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the mission, which to me, when people say the Silk Road, sometimes has a negative connotation, but I don't think of it that way. I think of it as a way of making those markets a little bit less violent, right? But I don't know if maybe I guess there's shady stuff happens on the dark net.
Oh yeah, on the dark net in general, like anyone can just set up a hidden server. And as much as people like to say Tor is decentralized, it's not. The distribution of the communications is decentralized. But when you're setting up a service like Silk Road, you're still centralized. You have a central point that you have to connect to, and that's what ended up being its downfall. They were able to, through an error that was revealed, they were able to find out the actual physical location of the Silk Road servers, and that's what caused the seizure. And the software that was powering Silk Road, when it first came out, it was actually fairly rudimentary. It was riddled with vulnerabilities, and there's reportedly funds constantly being stolen out of it, and they had to be there was an ongoing evolution of it over a course of a couple of years to actually make it a solid platform. And at the end, it was never a solid platform. That's what contributed to its downfall, was the fact that an error message revealed where the server was located. So it wasn't so much that the software itself was sophisticated, it was that the ideas behind it was sophisticated. He had put together basically a libertarian themed marketplace, and what was neat about it, and is completely ignored by the media, is that essentially there was no violence that was allowed on the Silk Road. You could not hire a hitman. You could not even buy a weapon. They were completely separate other networks to engage in that type of activity. The only thing that was permitted was drugs. And
I think you could buy a gun on the Silk Road. I don't know about that.
Yeah, the Armory came out for the Armory. Essentially, the Armory is the sister site to Silk Road, which only existed for a brief period of time, because the logistics of shipping firearms over state lines illegally was quite difficult, and it ended up shutting down on its own volition. So there was because again, libertarians, free Second Amendment. So there is a subsection of the crypto anarchist community that was into participating in that, but they were not on Silk Road. They were specifically told to participate in a separate section, and the reason for that is pure operational security. Because if you look at how any underground marketplace works, if you were to go onto a credit card fraud forum and try to sell drugs, you would get banned. If you're going onto a drug forum to try to sell stolen credit cards, you would get banned. The reason is each of these different disorganized crime groups have their own three-letter agency after them. The people with the DEA after them don't also need the ATF after them. The people with the IRS after them don't also need the FBI after them. And so they'll keep their communities segregated, even though it's oftentimes the same actors playing within each community.
That was not my understanding of it. I thought that there were some other components to it. Okay, so
In what regard?
well, because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, you could also buy, what do you call that? Raw milk on the Silk Road. You
Yes,
could
you
buy
could.
your insulin.
You could buy anything on Silk Road. It was and that's and what's interesting is the way Silk Road was targeted simply because of what it was targeted because of what it represented, and the fact that drug sales were allowed on there simply just gave them the leverage they needed to go to start kicking in doors. But yeah, you could go and you could buy raw honey, you could buy milk, you could buy ebooks about how to pick up chicks. There's a I would say probably about 60% of the stuff being sold on Silk Road was stuff you could find on Amazon. Essentially, it was nothing more than an Amazon.com that you could use with Bitcoin, except it happened to tolerate the trafficking of controlled substances because of the political beliefs of the administrators. And those political beliefs are the reason that they went so hard against it.
Well, I feel like it was pretty civilized, right? Because
Yes,
there
for
was a
all intent,
certain code
yes.
of conduct, and I was told that there was also a doctor that was available through the Silk Road. So if you were having some sort of an issue, I guess he would give users advice,
On the
and they would write him and say, what if I do this? So at least it would prevent needless overdoses and issues like that, where you would mix drugs and you would have dangerous cocktails, so to speak, because this guy would be able to help.
Yeah, harm reduction was definitely a big theme within the Silk Road community, and beyond just the store, there was the Silk Road forums. I don't even think I think they got taken out with the raid, or maybe they're still around. I'm not even sure what the status of the Silk Road forums are, but that is where the majority of the discussions took place around the marketplace. That's where people would talk about who was selling what, who was ripping who off, who was legitimate, and for the most part, the people who are participating in a fully encrypted communication network where they very well know that there are risks involved, but but they're still willing to take this step because of their political beliefs. For the most part, they're not they're pretty sophisticated technologically, and they're usually fairly advanced professionals. These aren't just junkies. It's hard for a junkie to scrape together enough Bitcoin to do anything with. Try to explain the concept of Bitcoin to to most people, and then you'll just get glassy eyes. And whereas this, it was full-heartedly backed by the political beliefs of the people who found it. And like all of these early Bitcoin startups, they grew to a scale beyond what they intended. It was mostly started off as what seems like an experiment that grew beyond anything that they were able to handle. Same like what happened with Mt. Gox. Whatever people's opinions are on what happened there, essentially the dude started something, it grew beyond his control, and bad things happened. The house of cards fell over, and that seems to be a running theme within a lot of Bitcoin startups, be they legal or illegal.
Hmm. What about other people? I have a couple questions from the audience. Somebody asks, well, first of all, is that a Bitcoin chart behind you?
Yeah, Trouble
Right
in
on.
Greece says gains on Bitcoin.
I want to talk about Greece today, but let's keep talking about this. So somebody asked, how does the government use the dark net? Do they do illegal shit? To preface that with my own experience with the Deep Web movie, which I found, I don't think that they set out to make that movie to be as sympathetic as it ended up being, but I think that somewhere along the way, and this is just my opinion, the people that made that movie really became enamored and impressed with the ethos of the Silk Road. But they also said that there were other people that used the dark net, including whistleblowers, some terrorists, hackers, governments, political dissidents, etc. How do you think that that lays out?
Yeah, essentially, it's a technology like any other. And the governments are definitely making use of it. And what's more, and to prove that fact, the Tor network itself was developed by the U.S. Navy intelligence labs. The exact department that developed that created it was It was developed by Michael Reed for the purpose of U.S. intelligence communications online for the United States Naval Research Laboratory. So Silk Road was being hosted on a darknet that was invented by the United States Naval Research Laboratory for the purposes of intelligence agencies. Now, the reason Tor was invented. No.
Our audio just got messed up for a second.
Okay, do I need to repeat that? Or essentially, I was saying that the Tor network itself. Are we?
Hey, I have random music on. Oh, sorry guys, that was a total mess. All right, I don't even know what just happened. Sorry about that. All right, continue. So, going back to what you were just saying, so you're saying that the government founded the Tor network.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but Tor was invented by Michael Reed of the U.S. Naval Intelligence Research Labs for the purpose of having a secure network for intelligence agencies around the world to communicate. So a State Department diplomat in one country can send a message to a State Department diplomat in another country, and it won't be intercepted by any intelligence agency down the line. And their idea was to make it an open and decentralized network so that if everybody's using it, there's plausible deniability as to where it came from, where it's going to, and if the message was encrypted the entire way, then it's a truly secure network. And what ended up happening is this technology. See, what year was this invented in? This was invented in the 90s. So 15 years later, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, working in conjunction with the research labs, puts together this big free anonymous privacy network, encouraging everyone to get on it and make use of it. And so yes, not only are governments making use of this, they invented it for the purpose of intelligence exchange, which goes right into terrorism, espionage, and everything else. That's what it was invented for. And then things like Silk Road come around and kind of counter what its original intents were. And but again, it's like any technology.
If they own Tor, right, and if they created it, wouldn't they have an awareness of everything that's on there?
And they do, and they are, and that's not being spoken about. Essentially, any secure
Tor is supposed to be anonymous. That's the whole point of it. You can go and do whatever, but you think that's not true. And why do you think that?
Essentially, it's no longer. It's essentially been proven at this point. There are numerous ways to unmask the IP address of someone using Tor. Essentially, if they're not you can use Tor, and then you can use Tor incorrectly. If you're using if you're not disabling your JavaScript, if you're running an outdated browser version that has vulnerability in it, you can have your JavaScript turned on remotely. And then the moment your JavaScript is enabled, the moment your JavaScript is enabled, the website you're visiting on the Tor network is able to unmask your original IP address, and they can see where you're coming from. You're no longer on the Tor network, they're reading your local IP address. And in addition to that, setting up monitoring, when you look at how the Tor node connects by default, you're only doing 3 hops. So you come in through, your traffic is encrypted, comes off your computer, goes into the first hop, passes to 2 more, and on the third hop, it's decrypted and sent out. So anyone who's running that third hop, that's known as an exit node. Anyone can set themselves up to be an exit node and just sniff that traffic, and you'll see everything that's coming off of it in plain text. If the user's not specifically encrypting that traffic, anyone running an exit node can see that traffic. Now, let's say the user is encrypting it. Well, you just set up, anyone with enough processing power can set up several computers, basically take over a majority of the Tor network by having a number of, if you control the number of nodes in the Tor network, in other words, if you make a bunch of Tor machines using the cloud or whatever, everyone will start routing through your infrastructure. So now you've got the entry and the exit points. You're able to start seeing what traffic's going to where and where it came from, and you're able to see that initial hop that it came from. So there are many, many ways to unmask the Tor visitors on Tor, and confirmed there are many both public and private sector firms mapping out every single Tor node that goes online, offline, what time that happened, and monitoring every bit of data that's coming off the exit nodes as well. That's currently going on.
What's JavaScript?
One more time?
What's the JavaScript?
Oh, JavaScript, like JavaScript in general it's a programming language that it's used very heavily on most every website now. You'll be hard pressed to find a website that doesn't make use of JavaScript. When Google gives you a block of code to paste in for your analytics, that's JavaScript code. If you've ever moved your mouse and you see the little trailies behind the mouse, that's JavaScript. All sorts of animations and that type of stuff. And it's essentially a very lightweight programming language that can be run in your browser. And just like HTML or just like HTML or just like any other web-based programming language, you can just insert it on a website and it'll execute. Now, secure Tor browsing, you want to disable JavaScript because it's a very powerful language and you can execute all sorts of system commands with it. So by default, the Tor browser bundle, which got exploited by the FBI, would have JavaScript turned off. And there's one particular case that took place about 2 years ago where the FBI had made use of an exploit in the Tor browser bundle which automatically had JavaScript turned off. The FBI found a vulnerability within that version of Firefox, and they put the unmasking JavaScript on a bunch of honeypotted child pornography websites. And every person that hit that website would have their IP address unmasked and their original location was revealed. And then after a few weeks of collecting data that way, they did a multinational shutdown of both servers and visitors to the websites. And that they were doing that for a crime that no one can argue is depraved, and there needs to be law enforcement action against that. But they're using those same tactics against activists as well, and that's where it becomes dangerous. It's not in the tactics, it's where they're applying them.
Yeah, I thought that was actually one time where I would be like, all right, that's okay, trap the pedophiles, but it does seem to be exploited in the wrong way.
Yeah, it's like any tool. It's like any tool of if they're using it for good purposes, then there's no problem. But the moment it's being exploited for political gain or something malicious, then it becomes something else entirely.
Do you think that the government is the most powerful person involved on the Tor network, or does, like, for example, does their creating of it make them the godfathers of it, or is it more powerful based on the skill level of the different people on there in terms of what they're able to do, how they're able to interact with one another?
Essentially, the government itself is very bloated and slow. They invented it early on, and their law enforcement and intelligence apparatus likes to make use of the data, but it's essentially the private sector. The private security firms have the stronghold on the Tor network. Companies with names no one will ever hear about, until they're leaked in some Snowden document, and those are the ones who are truly the all-seeing eyes, and then they're kicking it upstairs to government folks. But again, government is not, like, they're powerful in that they have the ability to kick in a door, wave a gun, and lock someone in a cage. They're not powerful technologically. They rely on the private sector for that.
So they just hire other people, right?
100% through contracting and subcontracting, and anyone who goes through the Snowden leaks can see the list of companies they use.
Now, as a freedom-minded person, is that, like, are there different government entities working? Because when I think of government, I think of, okay, this is the state, right? Yeah. So I think Russian government, U.S. government, they're all the same. Generally they're not my friend. But do they see each other as allies in those cases? Do you think that that illusion of statehood dissolves?
Depends on the country. Like, there's actually the concept of, as corny as it sounds, cyber war. It's more, in reality, it's just digital warfare. It's here. It's actually going on. A lot of it is staged. Like for example, all the yes, there is a lot of hacking activity coming out of China and Russia. That's simply because it's easy to get hold of hacked servers in China and Russia, and so a lot of times attribution of
Wait, Alex, I'm
yes,
sorry, Alex, I totally lost you on that, and I'm really interested to hear your answer. Would you mind repeating that one more time?
sure. Is this better? Okay. Yeah, essentially, there's a real digital there's a cyber war going on right now, and it's going on between the typical nation states that you would envision, and a lot of it has to do with just knocking each other offline or infiltrating systems and pulling data out like what we saw with the federal government breach where all the top secret clearances were exfiltrated. That was going on. That was going on with that was attributed to China, and I'm very hesitant as to say that it's all tracing back to China or North Korea or Russia, because it's very easy to just gain control of a system, hack into a system there, and then bounce off of it and make it look like it's coming from there. And the cooperation from those governments isn't going to it's not going to help. They're not going to be of any help to tell you where the attack came from. So a lot of the big firms will just kind of say, oh, this attack came from China, this attack came from Russia, and then they'll use that as an excuse to pass CISPA legislation. They'll use that as an excuse to say, okay, because of all this bad things going on, we need to start monitoring your traffic because there's viruses out there. We need to start deep packet inspecting everything to protect your bank account because bad things could happen. So we need to see every little. We need to be able to see all the traffic, and that's essentially what's going on. It's a theater of cyber warfare for between all governments, which are in collusion, that have the end goal of creating their all-seeing eye on the internet, which is they want total surveillance. They want their total information awareness program, and like anything else, they're going to false flag their way to it.
Can you tell me a little bit about the difference between the white hats, the gray hats, and the black hats?
Sure. Essentially, white hat hackers are, we'll start with black hats. Black hat hackers are motivated solely by profit or malicious intent. Like they want to get someone over on someone, or they just want to make some money, and they don't care who gets hurt along the way. That's the concept of the black hat. So, for example, someone who steals credit cards and then sells them to other credit card fraud people, that would be a black hat. And a white hat would be someone who has the same skill set as the black hat, only they're applying it to ethical and defensive reasons. So, for example, which has actually happened with me, I'm making a purchase on a website, and I discover that I'm able to exfiltrate every single credit card on the website. Well, instead of taking the cards, I hit up the administrator and say, hey, you might want to fix this. And 99% of the time, if you approach them right, they're incredibly thankful, because who wouldn't want to know about something like that? And then there's a whole most of the information security specialists that work within the IT community, a lot of the government contractors, like from the companies we spoke of, some could argue that whole surveillance stuff would be pretty black hat, but ethically they're considered white hat because they're not actually breaking into anything. And then gray hat is that gray area in between. Those who are like, their ethics are kind of on the whim of how they're feeling that day. Some days they might do hacking for crime. Other days they might notify the administrator if they notice they're not going to be able to get any money out of it. That's kind of a gray hat. And I would even argue that a new interpretation of gray hat would be all these white hats that are doing unethical work on surveillance stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little bit. I asked earlier today what people are there with conviction, what people will stand behind, some sort of a moral code, and the community said that, oh well, not a lot of people will do it. So when I think about that, that's kind of how I look at this white hat, black hat, gray hat. I mean, it's very similar to human nature in general. You know, some people are good, some people are bad, some people are basically just there to facilitate whatever makes their life easier. Somebody's asking, do private security firms like Blackwater hire hackers? I'm
Oh,
sure
yes.
that they do. I would think so.
Yes, 100%.
Who are some people, and how do you find a hacker? How do you know who to hire?
LinkedIn. For the most part, places like LinkedIn, Dice.com. Find the right information mercenaries. You only need to know the right keywords and certifications to look for, and you'll find the right people. Oftentimes, word of mouth. People have done certain jobs. They'll get referred to certain people, and but yeah, it's a pretty transparent world in regards to who's available for what. It's just what's being done when is what's the secret stuff.
So you and I have been talking about a conference that I'm helping out with my company, Crypto Media Hub. We're helping out All Convention, which is a conference in Batumi, Georgia, on the Black Sea, which is located close to the Ukraine, close to Russia, close to Turkey. And those areas have a lot of people that are interested in computers. There's a lot of programmers, there's a lot of coders, a lot of hackers and stuff like that. So David, who's the main guy behind the conference, he invited you to potentially help out with that. Now, can you tell me what kinds of conferences there are in terms of, I'm sorry, what type of hackathons there are, and how is this one any different, if it is at all? Because there was a reason why you suggested one type for that region. If you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, essentially, there's two types of hackathons that take place, and it's again one of those terms that are thrown around, and they can be completely different, but they're essentially the same thing. So you have developer-based hackathons, which are what most people are familiar with. People get together and they do like a coding boot camp. They'll write software. They do like a startup in a weekend type thing, write software to do a cool little project and get a prize. And then you have capture the flag hackathons, where it's usually an attack and defend style style game, where it's not really that you're building anything, but you're straight up attacking. You're either attacking other players, attacking preset targets, or attacking software of a vendor who's decided to participate in the game. For example, one of the things we do at Hack Miami is we set up the command and control capture the flag tournament, where we set up a bunch of different operating systems that are identical to the operating systems used by various foreign governments, and we have simulated nuclear power plants, simulated electronic grids, and then a whole bunch of things going up the chain. And the goal is you have to hack into each of these countries and essentially exploit these critical infrastructure systems. But it's all simulated and it's all part of a video game. And we even had we even did an event in Washington D.C. where the NSA sponsored it. And that's the type of hackathon where basically that's the world that I come from, where it's straight up attack and defend. And when I was approached with this concept of assisting with a hackathon, a Bitcoin hackathon out in that region, I was thinking that they're probably going to want something that's more of a developer-oriented one. But based on the skill sets of a lot of the folks in that region, they might want to have an attack and defend one. And kind of along the lines of what Stripe does. Stripe is a US merchant provider that accepts credit cards through an API function, through an API string. And their entire business is based off this credit card processing API. And every year they'll do a hackathon where you have to try to break their API, use it to commit some kind of fraud, or just find everything you can that's wrong with it. And the person who attacks it the worst gets the prize, and because that's helped build up the business. So those are those are all ideas that we're batting around, and just kind of I see the concept of Bitcoin hacking and Middle East, Eastern Europe, all kind of being a perfect melting pot for a really good time.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit more about Bitcoin and back it up a little bit. What do you think the origins are of Bitcoin? Because, you know, sometimes you look at all the great things that one can get from the internet, and then there are other components of the internet that have allowed for a lot of government encroachment. Then we find out that something like Tor is built by the government as well, and they're also exploiting it once again. Do you think that there could be an element in Bitcoin that would be that may have some darker origins, or do you think that this is something that people should be concerned
Well,
about? When people talk about a world currency, do you think
yes,
this is a way of sneaking it in through the back door? I know it sounds
yes.
a little conspiratorial, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, all we know about Bitcoin, well, we know that the first major decentralized peer-to-peer encrypted communication network was invented by the U.S. Naval Research Labs. And then the Bitcoin white paper was released to this day but as an anonymous author. And shortly, sometime in the summer of 2011, one of the main developers from the Bitcoin Core project, and I believe some top people from the Bitcoin Talk forums, they all posted about it on the forum. They were invited out to a CIA conference to discuss the concepts of cryptocurrencies and ways that can be used by intelligence agencies. And it was it was supposed to be just like an open roundtable information sharing type thing. And I mean, I don't think it was. I mean, I can't speak to as to where it was invented because the only documentation as to its origin is the Satoshi white paper. But when you consider the concept of, you know, the New World Order is never able to ram in any of their agendas by force. There's always resistance. It's always been by consent. And what better way to implement their one world currency platform that requires no auditing trail, no warrants, no anything. The blockchain is completely public. Every single transaction and every single Bitcoin address can be traced down to an IP address that sent it. And if you've got some kind of marker to that Bitcoin address, be it a name or even just a social network profile in a post, that entire transaction chain is completely public from the beginning of the Bitcoin chain to the end of the Bitcoin blockchain. And when I gave a presentation at DEF CON on this topic, some of the most eager participants sat in the front row and announced they had worked for the Federal Reserve. And they couldn't wait to have a 100% auditable money transfer system. They were highly looking forward to this.
Doesn't that sword cut both ways, though? Because, again, not to keep going back to the Silk Road, but I think that that's a very good example. You know, two government officials have recently pled guilty. One of them, I believe, stole $400,000 worth of Bitcoin. The other one stole $800,000 worth of Bitcoin. People on a day-to-day are not participating in the mass looting and the mass crime that governments participate in every day with their little banking buddies and all their cartels and the money going from this hand to another hand. Wouldn't there be a net positive in that case? I mean, I'm not a fan of surveillance in the first place, and some of the things that you raise obviously concern me because I think that there should be some modicum of privacy in terms of exchanging money. But wouldn't that also help keep governments honest?
In a way, it would, because like any technology, it would create greater transparency into the auditing records. But it's not impossible to obfuscate and launder through Bitcoin. It's actually made easier, and with literally hundreds of altcoins now, if someone knows what they're doing, if someone loads up their Bitcoin wallet through the Tor network on a hacked wireless network in a country they don't even live in to send a transaction to somebody's Bitcoin address that they were given on a crumpled piece of paper, and they bounce those Bitcoins through all the different exchanges, bouncing through dog coins and Litecoins and whatever coins, and then all the way back around. Yeah, they might have ended up spending 20% on all the exchange fees, but then they've got a clean batch of coin. So it's still possible to do. And I imagine if this were to become like the big one world government thing and the banksters are doing what they do, they'll probably have a pretty slick method for doing it themselves if the little guy is right now. And And in regards to the crooked cops in the Silk Road case, that those indictments read like something out of The Wire or The Shield, and I was honestly expecting the case to get thrown out just based on that. But it just shows how far deep that rabbit hole goes.
Well, arguably one could say that, okay, even if we could see that the government is spending money in a way that it's not supposed to, I mean, let's just say that we agree with taxes, which is questionable at times in certain applications, but or most, they would still have guns, so would it really matter? Because they're able to use the system against the people regardless of right or wrong. I mean, there's countless cases right now of the government doing terrible, terrible things and getting away with it, from police brutality to torturing of people, even though, you know, all those torture reports came out. I mean, they were raping children in front of their mothers, and they're able to get away with that because they are in power. So even if there was transparency, would that necessarily help? Or
Probably,
do you think, who wins? You know, do the people win, or does the surveillance state win?
It seems like the surveillance state would win in that regard, but again, like we've been saying, it's a theme that's kind of going back to the beginning of our discussion. It's a technology like anything else. It can be used, if it's used properly, it can, essentially, it can be used to be beneficial in this anonymous alternative economy. But as a complete replacement to our current system, I think it becomes quite dangerous. As an alternative, I think it's incredibly powerful. But once it becomes the standard instead of the alternative, then I think things will start to get hairy.
Well, wait, now what if we got rid of all state-run currencies and we just had a number of different cryptocurrencies? Let's say Bitcoin was the main one by which everybody would judge, which there's some questions about that because there's certain things that Bitcoin can't do, blah, blah, blah. But what if there were a number of only cryptocurrencies in the world? Would that be better than the current systems where governments can, and let's just say overall it would be better because there wouldn't be people randomly printing money out of nothing, or at least people could opt out of those systems if needed.
Like, I think the same issues would be come across in that system that the United States experienced right after the Reconstruction era, when all the or during the Civil War and into Reconstruction, when the Confederate states each one decided to start printing their own cash and then kind of balancing which states independent money was worth what and where, and it becomes too much overhead, whether or not it would fail or succeed with cryptocurrency, who knows? Because crypto is different than paper, and people talking over the internet in different parts of the world is different than a couple guys in the 1800s bartering over a bale of hay in the Reconstruction era. So that would remain to be seen, but I think a lot of the initial growing pains would be very similar, which would be agreeing on exchanges.
I want to talk about something, before, when you talk about the New World Order, right? I don't think that everybody who's watching this show necessarily wants to hear about that, or they feel like that's automatically a tag word that you associate with conspiracy theorists.
It's an international relations term.
Well, also, at the same time, I think that people would generally believe that governments are doing a lousy job. So how do we as a community highlight to people that there is some sort of or is that maybe too sensationalistic? Like, how do you explain to people that there may be powers at work that have a overall greed for our life source? How do you kind of communicate that to people? How do you tell people about the New World Order without sounding like Alex Jones?
Yeah. Essentially, when I'm saying the phrase New World Order, I'm using it in the international relations context of the post-Cold War era, where governments, basically Bush's definition of the New World Order, the guy who came up with it, he says it's basically a state of affairs where governments are able to work together and blah blah blah. So essentially, and it's not the governments themselves, it's the corporations that own the governments. When multinational corporations, MNCs, they could be based, they could be started off in Dallas or Austin, and then they end up moving to Dubai like Halliburton did. Those are multinational corporations. Their power supersedes that of the state. When they start bundling up together and brokering their power over nations that have a smaller GDP than their entire gross for that year, that's when I guess some would call it conspiratorial, but others would just call it business. It's the strong and with money taking over the weak and without, and governments are essentially just bloated, weak corporations, and MNCs are the exact opposite.
Okay. Well, that's a lot to think about. Couldn't you make the argument that they're trying to do something good for us? I mean, aren't they just trying to help people and, making sure that, okay, look at, for example, today I was asking folks about why do people think that the UN is bad? Because the UN, look, they've got all these flags and everybody's represented and we're all going to talk about it peacefully. Like, why would somebody make an opposite argument for the UN? Let's say some people think the UN is bad. Why is the great? Why would you say that the UN is bad then, and why would something like that be a bad thing?
Well, there's all sorts of disinformation arguments as to that, but the real reason as to why organizations like the UN are a problem is that they're steam valve organizations that make it seem like decisions are being made on a collaborative basis, when in reality they're going on in the back rooms just like any other, just like they've always been. The decisions are being made at the Bilderberg Group. The decisions are being made at meetings we haven't heard of because they don't let the media there. And the United Nations is essentially theater.
What can people do in order to prevent some of these encroachments on our freedoms, right? Because, the past couple of weeks I've been really feeling bummed out. I feel like the Silk Road case for me, I took it very personally. I think that it's really an indication of things to come. It's an indication that there's a complete suspension of justice. Whatever somebody thinks about Ross, you can't say that he got a fair trial. He wasn't allowed to mention the corruption. They never proved how they got the servers, which may have been illegally. He wasn't allowed to have expert witnesses to discuss his case. So I think that there was a complete suspension of justice. And at the same time, and then at the same time, you have a mass media that's telling people, okay, look at, the gay thing, and I'm very happy that gays can marry now. Wonderful. Aside from the fact that I would prefer if the government wasn't involved in marriage in the first place, but that's wonderful. I totally get it. But to me, that's also distracting from the TPP and different things that are much more pressing. And I think that there are a lot of people out there that are unaware, even though there are people that are aware, and it gets very discouraging. What do you have to say about that? Do you think that there's any hope for mankind? And do you think that that's within the hackers? Because I think that the hackers actually have a huge influence on how the world is shaped, because they're creating decentralized systems, they're creating uses of technology wherever it comes from to bring about freedom and more options for people.
Yeah, the hackers will definitely help, but essentially it's going to come down to individuals understanding the freedoms that they're losing, because if they don't know what they have, they don't know them when they're gone. The average American probably couldn't recite 5 of the 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights. So having a thorough understanding of what it is that's being lost is critical, and becoming and not being intimidated by the technologies that are coming out and being put out by the science people and the math people. Hackers can only do so much. We can, we're hackers. Like, we just hack stuff together. It can get we can get you started, but it's really up to each person to take the tools that they're given, learn how to use them. Yes, they might be complex, but learn how to use them, and basically use the internet to scale the amendments and the rights that you do have. So freedom of speech. That used to just mean that, okay, so now if you're speaking at a town hall, you're not going to get, the British guards kicking in your door. Well, now you're able to say things to millions of people on the internet, and you're still protected by that same amendment based on the location you're in. That things like that, understanding that the Fourth Amendment applies to your digital devices just as much as it does letting a cop into your home, and making use of the technologies to so that if the government decides to just encroach on your digital life, you're going to make it very hard on them because they're going to have to do a lot of math to try to read what you're doing.
How do we keep each other out of jail and out of the path of the Eye of Mordor, so to speak? I mean, how do we prevent people who are speaking up? A lot of times throughout history, political dissidents, people who are having conversations, even though our conversation is in a peaceful way, neither of us is proposing anything wild or crazy, we just want our freedom, it can be misconstrued and used against us. This could be dissenting political commentary. How do people stay safe? Is that through just spreading the word and using the ability that we have to broadcast to others what's going on in each place? I mean, what do we do in order to protect ourselves?
Some would say anonymity is the way to stay safe, and in certain countries, I would agree. Like if you're in some really repressive foreign regime where they're just gonna shoot you in the night if they catch you tweeting about something. There are countries like that. If you're in a place like that, you might want to put on a Guy Fawkes mask when you're getting on the internet. But if you're in the United States, taking advantage of the First Amendment and putting your name behind your actions and not being afraid to put your face and say, like, I am, I know my rights, and I'm not afraid to, stand up for them. And what you'll find a lot of times is a lot of activists that kind of are getting railroaded stateside. It's because they're trying to stay hidden, and staying hidden doesn't look good to a jury because it's as if you're trying to hide something. Now, as bad as that sounds, like, I mean, the Nazis came up with that concept. Oh, what do you have to hide? If you've not got nothing to hide, reveal everything to us. But aside from that concept, if as American citizens you maximize your First Amendment right, and you put your name to that, and you're staying within the letter of the law, that's incredibly powerful, because there's nothing they can do to stop that. And the ideas you're spreading, they're not going to be stopped if they're good ones. And when they do end up picking up people unjustly, like they did with Weave, Andrew Auernheimer, the AT&T iPad hacker, or like they're doing with Jeremy Hammond, the person who's doing 10 years right now in Stratford in federal prison for hacking Stratford, and with DPR. These are all people who they're kind of going by aliases and stuff when they're doing what they were doing, and it didn't help. It basically gave the man something to chase. It gave them a cause to go after. And essentially, if you're just being portrayed as, if you're not going to directly affect the corporations that are really running things, you're kind of going to get left alone. And if you are messing with those corporations, then this is going to be like any other country, and it's going to be they play dirty.
Well, let's say that Ross had not been anonymous. I mean, I don't think that, let's say he's the only DPR, which I'm not convinced of at all, but let's say that Ross was, I mean, I don't think that starring in, hey, I'm Ross, I've got the best website, and I think this is a great form of, having an alternative to the black markets, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, chances are
that would have been, he would have gotten in trouble for that even if he hadn't been DPR.
Well, if he had done that with his full name, he probably would have been more restricted as to the items he allowed to be sold on the on the marketplace. There probably wouldn't have been a drug section. It probably would have been just, all the other stuff. Would it have been successful? Probably not. Maybe just not to the scale and as fast as it was. But and again, the word success is relative as to how it turned out. But essentially, like, yeah, also putting your name behind things can also kind of self-preserve yourself from stepping over a line that you might not even know exists. The federal government, basically the
Well,
federal
he probably
government.
knew that line existed.
Yeah, but
That wasn't
yeah,
like a
that's
secret
in that.
line.
Yeah, that's in that case. But the United States Criminal Code has over 10,000 laws. There are over 10,000 ways for a federal agent to decide that they're going to arrest you for something. So that's why there's a great YouTube video by an attorney out there that says never talk to cops. It's just don't talk to cops, and it's got like millions of views. And he opens it up by saying there are over 10,000 ways that the police can arrest you. And if anyone pulls up, just Google USCC 1030, USCC 1029. Those are the hacking provisions. They extend down to the most minuscule, strange things that affect allegedly interstate commerce, because they're United States criminal codes and the United States commercial codes, and again, notice they're not laws; they're called codes, and this is the federal government, and it's incredibly dangerous, and this just we got into this because I was talking about just like branding your activism with your name. When you're branding your activism with your name, you take more care to make sure you're not going to cross any of those lines, especially the really obvious ones.
Well, I mean, I would think that it would be very difficult to avoid crossing those lines since there's so many of them that you're not allowed to cross.
Yeah, it is, and even just the hurdles that a legitimate business owner tries to comes up against just putting together a business were to want to put together. If someone were just want to sell diet pills, for example, the amount of FDA regulation they would have to go through is insane. I mean, if a grocery store wants to sell raw milk, that'll get them SWAT teamed. It's very hard to operate. It's very hard to operate a business in a tyranny, and things like Silk Road helped that and made things easier. But due to operational security errors and debatable marketing choices, that's not how it turned out.
Hey, before we wrap it up, I've got one more question from the audience. This is such a good, interesting episode. I'd love to have you back on soon,
Anytime.
actually. Maybe we could talk a little bit about helping people stay secure. How do they keep themselves as much off the radar as possible? We could talk about some more of these things. We're also broadcasting to the Let's Talk Bitcoin audience, my people over there, whoop, whoop, and they have a thing called Secret Word. So I'm going to let you pick out the secret word today. It could be a secret word or a secret phrase. So why don't you give me your phrase that we're going to use for this?
Encrypted.
Encrypted. Okay, good. In case people can't spell that, there's something called the dictionary. There's also Google, but encrypted. Okay, cool. I like it. Here's a quick question, and then we're going to wrap it up. We don't want to keep everybody too long, but somebody asks, can Bitcoin be stolen by hackers? That's very true. And we could do this as a t-shirt for next time, but how can Bitcoin be stolen by hackers?
Oh, yes.
So, of course it can.
Yeah.
So how could people, really quickly, and then we could get into it more next time, but how can people, how do you steal someone's Bitcoins?
Yeah, quickest way for me to explain it is to Google Alex Heid, Hack Miami, Bitcoin, and you'll find my 35-page white paper on that very topic. And I'd be more than happy to go into it in detail on the next show.
All right. Well, tell you what. Why don't we do that next time? We're gonna talk a little bit more about how to keep ourselves secure. This was such an interesting episode, Alex. Thank you so much for joining me. If people want to find out what you're doing, you're going to be with me in Alt Convention October 8th through 10th in Batumi, Georgia. We're going to have Ascribe doing one of the hackathons. I think you're going to help with a breakdown one. And where else can people find you? What's your Twitter? What's your
Oh,
website? Blah, blah, blah.
yeah, Twitter at Alex Heid, AlexHeid, and also at Hack Miami, HackMiami.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Alex Heid, for joining me here today. Thank you to Liberty.me for hosting me. Thanks to my lovely audience on Let's Talk Bitcoin for also checking out the show. Everybody, we'll be back next week. I don't know what's going to be on. We never really know. It's kind of a loose show. Thanks for checking in. Stay tuned to TatianaMoroz.com for information. My Twitter is Queen Tatiana, and my company, in case you want to advertise or market to the crypto space, is CryptoMediaHub.com. Thanks, everyone. Peace out. Bye.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.